Welcome to Cosmic Dream, your gateway to the stars. Here we explore sci-fi worlds, futuristic tech, and cosmic mysteries that push imagination beyond limits. If you love space adventures, time travel, and the unknown, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, activate the cosmic bell, and journey with us through infinity. Asters, close your eyes for a moment, not to hide, but to lean in. Imagine the thin hush after a long summer day, air like warm milk. The last cicadas dwindling into a soft static that sounds almost like breathing. Picture a wide, low sky, a bowl of worn velvet, freckled with tired stars. Out beyond the town, where the highway slices the desert like a lone silver thread. There's a place people point to when they are trying to name the exact center of their smallness. They call it Roswell, but names are only signposts. The thing that happened there is a shape, not a word. Our story begins with Mira Hale, who still kept the lullabies of the desert in her bones. She had grown up in a house that smelled of coffee and old paper, where her father told stories that were mostly true and mostly not. How the coyotes learned to knock. How the wind sometimes carried messages from places we'd never seen. He had an old habit of pressing a hand over his chest when he spoke of the night. He swore the stars had moved. To 8-year-old Mira, the movement of stars was the best kind of possible mischief. To an adult Mira, who returned to the town after years away, it was a compass needle pointing to a single, stubborn question. Were there bodies? Were there things we had not yet learned how to explain wrapped in blankets and loaded onto trucks in the dark? She arrived one late afternoon in a car whose engine hummed like a lullaby, rolling into Roswell when the light had gone the color of old coins. The town was small enough that every street had a witness. A postmistress who could tell you your neighbor's cousins. A diner where the coffee tasted of truth. An antique shop where the owner sold postcards from futures that had never happened. People smiled in the way people do in places that have learned to live beside a rumor. A soft, weary smile that protects both the teller and the listener. Vera was a quiet woman in most things, but loud in this one. Questions. She carried a notebook that was half journal, half prayer, pages filled with names, with small sketches of symbols she didn't know yet, with lines of a lullaby her father had hummed when the old wound in his chest kept him awake. She'd come for answers, yes, but mostly she'd come to touch the edges of the story and see if it shimmered like a dream or hardened like a stone. The person who met her at the edge of town had hands like split riverbeds and a voice like gravel and honey. Elias Bain owned a long-armed ranch and a longer memory. He had been in the fields the night the sky seemed to fall, he said. But his telling was not the gripping, sensational sort. He spoke as if describing weather, measured, ordinary, intimate. You don't understand, Elias told Mira, setting a thermos of coffee between them and sitting on the tailgate of his truck, where the metal had been worn smooth by the touch of years. You see, the thing about that night is not that something fell. It's that something arrived carrying its own silence. Elias's farm sat on the cusp where the scrub softened into an expanse of flat desert. He walked Mira along the exact line he'd walked that night, the line of broken mesquite, the flats that glowed pale in moonlight. He pointed to a shallow depression where the earth still remembered being folded. I found it here first, he said. Not pieces of metal. Not exactly. There were these shards, but not the kind that cut. They were more like promises. They hummed under my palm, as if they had been holding their breath. He dug one thumb into the dusty earth and unearthed a thin sliver of something that looked like the inside of the moon, gray, slightly pearled, and impossibly cold. The fragment did not clink when he tapped it. Instead, it made a sound like the faint village bell you hear when you are half asleep. Not loud, not urgent, just precise. Mira put the fragment in her palm and felt, for a single, startling second, as if a long memory had reached a fingertip, the blink of a child learning the world. The taste of iron in the mouth the first time you kiss a page. They walked back to the ranch house as the sky grew inkier and the town lights came up, like a row of patient, blinking watchfires. Elias led Mira to an old wooden crate in his shed. The kind of crate that stores more than it holds. He said he had never opened it, not really. It had come off a truck, wrapped in military canvas in a stamped silence. When he finally tilted the lid back, it made a sound like old pages turning. Inside, under a bed of oilcloth, lay a bundle wrapped in a cloth that shimmered as though woven from the hush between notes. Mira's breath cooled the air as she leaned in. What was inside was smaller than the human mind likes to expect. It was not a corpse from horror stories. It was a stillness made visible, shaped small and careful, folded as if it had been put to sleep deliberately. The cloth smelled faintly of rain and ozone. The features beneath the linen were not ordinary limbs. They were slender and folded, like a poem in a language she could almost, but not quite, understand. There were no wounds that one could call violent. There were seams and sutures that suggested a body stitched in the geometry of unearthly patience. Mira's voice went low as she asked, "Is this?" Elias's answer was in the way his jaw clenched and in the way he let out a breath that sounded, for an instant, like somebody telling themselves a story to keep from waking. "I swore I'd never open what I didn't understand," he said. "But things have weight. Nights have memory. And I thought, maybe, someone ought to know." Outside the shed, the dessert made it slow. Indifferent music. A moth beat its wings against the single lamp like a small, desperate drum. Mira wanted to look, to examine, to name. But the story that had led her there felt like a living thing, and she had been taught, sometimes by her father at the edge of bedtime, that some living things must be invited to wake at their own pace. She reached for the cloth with hands that trembled the smallest degree. Not because she feared the thing inside, but because of the gravity of being the first person in a long time to press her fingers to a secret. When the cloth peeled back, it revealed not a face in the sense she was taught to expect, but an oval of skin the color of winter light, stretched thin as paper and marked with a pattern like a map of something she could not read. There were eyes closed, tight as prayer beads, and a mouth that had never learned the vocabulary of this world. Round the head were faint, almost hair-like filaments that shimmered with a faint internal glow. Like fish in a tide pool after dusk. Mira felt a small, ridiculous urge to check for a pulse. There was none. The world of doctors has instruments that can name absence. The world of night lore has fewer things to offer besides listening. So she listened, and while she listened, the silence around them changed. There was a sound, small and low, like someone humming from the inside of a seashell. It was not mechanical, not wholly organic. It was a pattern of intervals that the shoulder of a song might have if it had traveled too far, and learned to speak in pauses. Mira felt it in her sternum, as if someone had tuned a string beneath her ribs and plucked it with the gentlest curiosity. Elias lifted his eyes to the heavens as if to return a question to the place where it had begun. "They said simple things," he murmured, voice rough with years. "They said it was debris. That men in uniforms would come, take things away, make the story into a neat, forgettable package. But some things are not tidy. Some memories keep reaching, as if at the end of a lullaby, as if the desert itself wanted to keep the record of that night." A light slid across the horizon, not the careless sweep of a car, but a slow, deliberate arc that made the whole yard cold. For a breath, even the radio in the truck stuttered and then fell into a tone like a single held note. Mira looked at the small body again and then back to Elias. "If this is real," she whispered. "If these are, if bodies were taken, what else did they take with them? What did they leave?" Elias's hand found the rim of the crate. He closed his fingers around something wrapped beneath a second layer of cloth, a photograph, yellow with a sun it had never seen. He drew it out with the care one uses when handling a page of a book that has read you back. In the picture was a row of men in uniforms, their faces blurred by the grain of the print, and between them, folded into the shadow, a tiny profile that looked like the curled sleep of an animal not from this planet. Mira stared at the photograph until the edges softened. The hum in the air shifted, subtle as tide. She realized, with a feeling like the first small slide of a dream into morning, that the thing in that crate was a hinge. It would open something else, if only they had the courage or the folly to lift it. Elias looked at her, and for once the old man did not sound like someone telling a weather report. He sounded like someone issuing an invitation. "We can keep it here," he said softly, "or we can take it to the people in the uniforms. but I don't trust the kind of forgetting that wears a badge. Not when I have held something that hummed under my hand. Outside, the sky seemed to breathe. The stars watched like patient eyes. And in the shed, wrapped in a cloth that smelled of rain and static, the sleeping thing made a minute motion, so slight the word stir felt too loud. It was a motion like a question, a single, small uncurling as if from the inside of a dream. Mira's fingers hovered above it. The dessert exhaled. And then, from somewhere beyond the fence, something made a slow, precise sound, not a shout, not a knock, but the exact, impossible echo of a lullaby she had half remembered from childhood. Hummed now by a voice she could not place, she was about to lift a corner of the cloth, to give answer to that small, patient question, when the lights in the town went out all at once, a sharp, surprising slide into blackness that swallowed the road like a hand. The hum that had been lying under everything tightened into a single, clear note. Mira froze, breath halfway to her mouth, and the photograph in Eliza's hand trembled as though someone had set down a violin. "Just out of sight. Do you hear that?" Eliza asked, though she had already been listening. "Something from the sky, or something from the depths beneath it," replied with a sound like a key in a lock, and then, as if the whole world were holding its breath until the right moment, the shed door banged open in a gust of wind that smelled of thunder and memory. The small body opened its eyes. The shed was suddenly too small, too fragile to contain the weight of that moment. The air thickened, like the instant before lightning strikes. Mira's chest tightened as the cloth shifted, folding away to reveal not just skin, not just shape, but eyes. They were not like human eyes, not precisely. They were deep and unblinking. Two polished pools of night threaded with faint lines of light that shimmered, shifting, as if entire constellations lived inside them. When those eyes opened, Mira did not feel as though she was being looked at. She felt as though she was being read. Elias, who had not trembled even when he'd first shown her the body, stepped back now, as if those eyes contained something he had once promised himself he'd never see again. "It can't be," he murmured, his voice cracked like dry wood. "They said it was dead. They said—" The figure lay still, its body small, fragile in appearance, but the gaze it held was infinite, like the desert horizon after dark. Its chest did not rise and fall in the rhythm of breath, and yet Mira felt the presence of life, something subtler, something older than lungs or air. "Mira." Elias's voice was barely a whisper. "Don't touch it," but her hand was already moving, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by something deeper. A pull. She hesitated an inch above the being's skin, the way one hovers over still water, afraid of disturbing the reflection. And then, without ever making contact, she felt its warmth. Not heat like fire, but a quiet warmth, the way memories glow when recalled in the dark. The being's eyes shimmered brighter. A soft pulse rolled outward, silent but tangible. And Mira's notebook resting on a workbench fluttered open. Pages filled with her father's scrawled notes turned of their own accord, settling on a half-finished lullaby, the one he had never sung to the end. Her heart stumbled. She whispered, almost to herself, "You know this." The hum in the shed deepened, resolving into a low, resonant tone that made the glass lantern rattle against the wall. Elias pressed his palm to his temple as if trying to shield himself from the sound. "It's the same," he groaned. "The same tone from that night, when the sky split open, and then, as quickly as it had surged, the sound cut off." The shed fell silent again, except for the faint hiss of desert wind sliding through cracks in the boards. The being blinked once, slowly, and then, with delicate, trembling movement, raised a hand. Its fingers were longer than Mira's, jointed differently, tipped with faintly glowing ridges that reminded her of old cave paintings she had once seen carved into stone. The hand hovered in the air between them, a mirror of Mira's own outstretched hand. She met Elias's eyes. His were wide, wet, and frightened. "If you touch it," he said, voice breaking, "there's no going back." But something in her chest, the old ache left by her father's unfinished stories, the long pull of a question carried across years, told her that she had already crossed that line. The moment she saw the photograph, her fingertip trembled closer. The instant their hands met not with flesh, But with a pulse of unseen energy, Mira's mind split open like the desert under rain. She saw flashes. A sky filled not with stars, but with vast, shimmering structures that drifted like whales in a cosmic ocean. A chamber lined with walls that pulsed like living skin, holding rows of beings like this one. Eyes closed, waiting. A sudden rupture of light, a fall, a tearing sound that was both thunder and song. And then, men in uniforms, floodlights cutting the night, voices sharp, orders barked, trucks rolling. A cradle of silence stolen, boxed, and hidden away. Her knees buckled. Elias caught her by the shoulders, steadying her as she gasped for air. "What did you see?" he demanded. Mira could hardly form the words. "A memory," she whispered. "It's memory." The being lowered its hand again, as if the effort had drained it. Its eyes dimmed slightly, but they never left hers. And in that gaze, Mira understood something impossible. This was not simply a body. This was a survivor. She pressed her shaking hands to her face, trying to steady herself. "They weren't just collecting debris," she said. "They were taking prisoners." The word hung heavy in the shed. Prisoners. Elias shut the crate with a force that rattled the walls. "And if it's awake now," he muttered, voice low and urgent, "then others will know. They'll come." Mira looked up sharply. "Who?" Elias's eyes shifted toward the window, where the desert night stretched vast and endless. "Not just the ones who buried the truth," he said, "but the ones who left something behind." The lantern flickered. Outside, the wind carried a sound that was not wind at all, a low, rhythmic thrum, faint but growing, like the blades of a helicopter, or something else. Mira's heart raced. She reached for the crate, for the being still lying within, but Elias's hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard. His face was pale, his voice rough with fear. "Listen to me," he said. "Once they know it's awake, the real story begins." And once it begins, a beam of light cut across the shed window, sharp and searching. There's no stopping it. The being's eyes flared, brighter now, reflecting the beam like mirrors of another sky, and then the ground beneath them shuddered, as if the desert itself had turned to breathe. The desert is never truly quiet. Even at night, when the sky hangs heavy with stars and the sand cools under the moon's hand, there's always sound, the hush of shifting grit, the distant yip of coyotes, the slow creak of old wooden fences. But tonight, the natural course had been swallowed by something else. The ground trembled. Faint at first, like the slow beating of a drum deep underground. Then it grew steadier, clearer, not thunder, not an earthquake, but the unmistakable cadence of machinery. A searchlight swept across the shed again, bleaching the old wood in sharp white before sliding away into the dark. Mira and Elias crouched low, their breath thin as paper. The being in the crate had closed its eyes again, as if conserving strength. Yet its glow did not fade completely. Faint filaments around its head pulsed in quiet rhythm, like embers refusing to die. Elias whispered, his lips barely moving. "They're here." Mira's mind spun. The military? Who else would be chasing ghosts 70 years later? His jaw tightened. They never stopped watching this place. Just waiting. The beam of light swept closer. Tires crunched over sand. Voices, low, clipped, professional, broke the night. "Secure the perimeter." Infrared shows movement inside the shed. Mira's pulse hammered in her throat. She leaned close to Elias. "We can't let them take it again." Elias's withered face hardened, but his eyes carried a sorrow that Mira recognized, the same sorrow her father used to carry when he told stories he couldn't finish. "Child," Elias said, "they already own the story. We're just breathing inside the spaces they left." Before Mira could reply, a fist struck the shed door. The old boards rattled. "Open up. This is restricted property." Mira froze. Elias motioned her back, but she stayed firm, one hand resting lightly on the crate. The being stirred beneath the cloth again, as though it, too, felt the urgency pressing it from the night. The door shook under another blow. Last warning. Elias looked at Mira, then at the crate, then back again. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a choice that could not be taken back. Mira lifted the cloth fully. The being lay exposed, its skin shimmering faintly like moonlit water. Its eyes opened once more, brighter this time, burning with the memory of skies no human had walked beneath. And then something extraordinary happened. The humming returned, but not soft, not subtle. This time it was strong, resonant, a wave that rippled through the shed, rattling tools, cracking glass, and vibrating through Mira's bones. The searchlight outside flickered, stuttered, and died. Engines stalled. Voices shouted in confusion. Elias staggered, clutching his chest. It's interfering. With them, the being raised its hand again. But this time the gesture was not to Mira. It reached upward, toward the roof, toward the stars. The filaments around its head brightened into a halo of light dot, and in the distance, far above the desert, a second light answered. Not a star, not a plane, but a slow, deliberate glow, descending from the velvet sky. Mira's breath caught. It called to someone. The soldiers outside scrambled, barking orders. Mira heard the slam of rifle bolts, the metallic shuffle of boots on sand. A voice roared, "We have contact." Repeat, a known contact overhead. Elias grabbed Mira's arm. "We have to move, now." But Mira could not tear her gaze from the being. Its eyes fixed on hers, and in that silent stare she heard something, not words, but intention. A message that pressed against her thoughts like a tide. "Help me reach them." Her knees weakened. Not from fear, but from the enormity of what it asked. She whispered back, lips trembling, "How?" The hum deepened, flooding the shed, rattling the earth itself. Outside, the soldiers began to fire, but the bullets never struck wood. Each one veered off, dropping uselessly into the sand as if caught by invisible hands. The being's light surged, wrapping Mira and Elias in a cocoon of shimmering air. The sound of gunfire faded, muffled as though heard underwater. Elias's eyes widened in awe and terror. What in God's name? Before he could finish, the roof of the shed began to dissolve. Not break, not splinter. Dissolve, like mist under sunlight. Through it, Mira saw the descending glow more clearly now, vast and geometric, its edges shifting like liquid crystal. The soldiers shouted louder, panicked. Radios crackled with static. Unidentified craft. Repeat, Mira's heart raced. She turned to Elias. "We have to go with it. If we don't, they'll bury this forever." Elias hesitated, torn between survival and the weight of the moment. But the decision was made for him. The being lifted from the crate, rising weightless into the air, cloth slipping away like discarded skin. Its glow intensified until it was difficult to look directly at it. And then, with a single pulse of light, the shed walls vanished completely, leaving them exposed beneath the star-flooded sky dot above. The craft descended, silent and immense, casting the desert in pale silver. Its underside rippled with patterns that seemed to breathe, shifting in ways that defied geometry. The soldiers fell back, some dropping their weapons, others shouting into dead radios. The hum drowned everything. Mira clutched Elias's arm. "This is it." The being's gaze burned into hers once more, and she understood without words the story her father had begun. The lullaby left unfinished. This was the missing verse. The craft hovered lower, impossibly close now. The desert wind whipped around them, hot and electric. Mira felt her feet lift slightly from the ground. Elias's grip tightened on her wrist. His voice cracked with fear and wonder. "Mira, what if they're not here to save it? What if they're here to finish what began?" The light swallowed them whole. The desert fell away. Mira expected wind, weightlessness, or the sharp terror of falling. But instead there was only stillness, as if the world had paused mid-breath. Her feet touched no ground, yet she did not drift. Elias's grip on her wrist remained, though his hand trembled like a leaf clinging to its branch. Around them stretched a chamber made not of metal or glass, but of something alive. The walls pulsed faintly, translucent, their surfaces etched with rivers of light that shifted like veins under skin. Colors moved within those lines, fluid and slow, shades Mira had no names for. The being hovered between them, its filaments glowing brighter here, as though reunited with a familiar air. It lowered itself gently onto the luminous floor, if it could even be called a floor. And for the first time Mira saw its chest rise and fall, shallow but deliberate. Elias muttered, his voice hoarse. "We're inside it. Dear God, we're inside it." Mira's breath fogged slightly in the cool air. She reached for the wall, half expecting her fingers to pass through. But instead the surface yielded like soft clay before firming again. At her touch, light rippled outward in concentric waves, and the chamber responded with a low vibration, not mechanical, but musical. Like the resonant hum of a struck bell, the being turned its gaze toward her, and then the room changed. Images bloomed across the walls, not projected, but alive, as though the chamber itself were dreaming. Mira staggered as vast vistas unfurled around her, endless oceans under twin suns. Cities that spiraled upward like glass forests. Skies crisscrossed with glowing structures drifting like leviathans. She whispered, awed. "It's showing us." Where it came from, Elias's eyes darted nervously. Or what it wants us to believe. The being lifted its long hand again, and the vision shifted. Mira saw the desert, this very desert, decades ago. A craft plummeting through the night sky, fire trailing behind it. She saw men in uniform, younger, urgent, floodlights glaring across the sand. She saw them loading crates, covering bodies, silencing voices. Then the image froze, a younger Elias. Years stripped away, standing at the edge of that crater. Watching in silence, Elias staggered back, pale as dust. "No, that's not possible." His voice cracked, raw with the horror of recognition. "That's me. But I never told it. How could it?" The being's eyes glowed brighter, steady on Elias, as if to say, "You were always part of this story." Mira's throat tightened. "It's not just showing us the past," she said softly. "It's pulling from memory. Yours, mine, maybe everyone's who's touched this place." The chamber shifted again. This time Mira saw her father. He was younger, seated at his desk, scribbling notes into his worn leather journal. She saw him pause, press his hand to his chest the way he always did when the old wound pained him. Then he hummed the lullaby, the one that had never reached its final verse. Mira's eyes burned. "Dad." The tune filled the chamber now, the walls resonating with each note until it became more than sound. It was vibration, light, pulse. The unfinished song completed itself here, resolving into a final, haunting chord that made her chest ache. Elias gripped her shoulder. "Mira, look." She turned. At the far end of the chamber, an opening was forming. Not a door, not a hatch, but an iris of light unfurling slowly. Beyond it stretched a corridor that seemed infinite, lined with what looked like cocoons. Each one glowed faintly from within. Mira stepped closer, drawn as if in a dream. Inside the nearest cocoon was a figure, slender, pale, eyes closed, breathing slow as deep sleep. Another lay in the next, and another. She gasped. "There are more of them, dozens, maybe hundreds." Elias's face twisted between awe and dread. "Dear God, they've been here all along." The being from the crate stood weakly, steadying itself against the chamber wall. Its gaze swept across the rows of sleeping kin, then turned back to Mira. She felt the message press against her again, stronger this time. They were taken, hidden, forgotten. Her knees weakened. "You're saying Roswell wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a prison." Elias shook his head, horror dawning in his eyes. "And if they wake," he gestured at the countless cocoons. "If all of them wake, what happens then?" Before Mira could answer, the chamber shuddered violently. The images on the walls shattered like broken glass. The hum wavered. Elias braced himself. "They're attacking from outside." Through the living walls, faint but clear, came the sounds of gunfire, explosions, the whine of engines. The soldiers had not fled. They were striking back, desperate to contain what they could not understand. The being staggered, its glow faltering. The cocoons flickered, some dimming dangerously. Mira felt panic surge in her chest. She turned to Elias. "We can't let them die here. We have to help." Elias stared at her, his face torn with conflict. "Help them? Mira, we don't even know what they are. What if freeing them means ending us?" The chamber trembled harder, dust falling from the glowing veins above. One of the cocoons cracked, spilling light so bright Mira had to shield her eyes. From within, a shape began to stir. The being's gaze locked onto hers. a plea burning in its constellation-filled eyes. Choose. The chamber quaked, alive with conflict. The pulse of the ship's walls faltered like a heart skipping beats. Shivering beneath the assault outside, Mira clutched the glowing veins along the wall for balance. Her breath quick and shallow. The cocoons flickered in waves, light dimming, swelling, dimming again, as though the sleepers inside were caught in a struggle between dreams and death. The being beside her reached for her with trembling hands, eyes bright and imploring. The message pressed into her mind again, heavier now, almost urgent. Free them. Awaken us. Mira's pulse thudded in her ears. She shook her head, whispering to herself, I don't even know what that means. I don't know if you're safe. Elias's voice cut through her fear, gruff but cracking at the edges. Mira, listen to me. I was there when it fell. I saw what they carted away in those trucks. You free them, you might be unleashing something we were never meant to carry. He turned toward the glowing cocoons, his eyes hardening. Maybe the uniforms were right to bury this. Mira spun on him, her voice low, fierce. You've lived with that guilt for 70 years, Elias, hiding what you saw, pretending the story ended. But it didn't. They're alive. They were stolen. You think locking them away makes us safe? Or does it just make us complicit? Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, his withered face softened with the shadow of memory, the boy he once was, staring at a crash site under floodlights, silenced by men who carried secrets in iron boxes. The chamber shook violently again. Through the translucent walls, Mira glimpsed explosions blooming in the desert night, bursts of fire against the stars. The soldiers' weapons were tearing into the ship's skin, leaving deep, spreading scars of black. A crack spidered across one cocoon. Light spilled out, blinding, until it split open fully. Mira shielded her eyes with her arm. From within emerged a figure, taller than the being she had found, its limbs long and fluid, its body almost translucent. Its eyes opened slowly, and the same star-filled gaze spilled forth, infinite and unblinking. The chamber hushed. Even the quakes seemed to pause. The figure's gaze moved over Mira, then Elias, then finally to the smaller being that had awakened first. The two regarded one another, silent but electric, like chords of a melody reconnecting after long silence. Mira whispered, "It's one of them, another survivor." The new being stepped forward. The walls of the chamber responded, their veins brightening again, as if the ship itself drew strength from its presence. The hum returned, stronger, resonant enough to shake dust from Mira's hair. Elias stumbled back, eyes wide with terror. No, it's calling the others. It's trying to wake them all." And he was right. The cocoons around them pulsed in unison now, light rippling outward in a chain reaction. Dozens began to glow brighter, their occupants stirring, their long limbs shifting as if restless in sleep. The soldiers outside roared in renewed panic. Mira heard muffled orders, the clatter of more weapons, the rising desperation of men who realized they were standing at the edge of something they couldn't contain. Mira. Elias grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "We have to get out. This isn't our fight. If you stay, you won't survive what comes next." But Mira's eyes locked on the smaller being, the one who had first opened its eyes in Elias's shed. Despite its weakness, despite its trembling, it gazed at her with something achingly familiar. Not threat, not violence, but longing for release. Her father's unfinished lullaby stirred in her memory. The song he could never bring himself to end. The song that had found its missing verse only here, inside this living ship. She turned back to Elias, her voice quiet but steady. "It is my fight. It's always been my fight. My father knew. That's why he kept writing, kept searching. He wasn't afraid of the truth. He was afraid of silence." Elias's eyes filled with tears, shining in the glow. "And what if the truth burns the whole world down?" Mira looked at the rows of cocoons, now blazing with light, awakening one by one. She placed her hand gently on the wall. The veins flared, the hum surged, and the choice was no longer a thought but an action. She whispered, "Then let it burn." The chamber exploded with brilliance as the cocoons split, releasing their sleepers into the air. Dozens of glowing beings rose, their filaments shimmering, their star-filled eyes opening in unison. The hum became a symphony, a resonance that rattled the very bones of the earth. Outside, the soldiers' weapons fell silent. Their engines sputtered and died. Radios hissed with nothing but static. The desert itself seemed to bow under the weight of the awakening. Mira stood among them, her face bathed in light, trembling not with fear, but with awe. Elias fell to his knees, whispering hoarsely, "Dear God, what have we done?" And then, as if in answer, the largest of the newly awakened beings turned its gaze toward Mira. The chamber dimmed, the other beings quieted, waiting. It spoke, not with a voice, but with a thought so vast it pressed against every corner of Mira's mind. The time of silence is over. The chamber pulsed with a rhythm that was not only sound, but sensation. Mira felt it thrumming in her bones, in her blood, in the hollow spaces of her mind. The newly awakened beings hovered above the glowing floor, dozens of them now, their eyes shimmering like galaxies, unblinking in the void. Outside, the desert still echoed with chaos. Muffled through the living walls came the shouts of men, the grind of engines that failed to start, the frantic scramble of boots on sand. Yet their noise seemed small now, like ants scattering under the shadow of a storm. The tallest of the beings drifted forward. Its body radiated a pale, steady light that painted Mira's skin in silver. When it fixed its gaze on her, the weight of it was staggering, as if every star in its eyes were staring at once. The thought came, not as words, but as a tide breaking into her skull. You carry the memory, the song incomplete, the thread left unwoven. Mira's breath caught. She felt her father again, his hand on her head when she was small, his voice humming that half lullaby as he stared at his desk with eyes that looked through walls. She saw his unfinished journal, his endless questions, his quiet ache. Tears blurred her sight. She whispered aloud, though no sound was needed, "He knew you were waiting." The being inclined its head slowly, as if acknowledging a debt long uncollected. Elias pushed himself to his feet, his face pale, his jaw set hard. "What do you want from her?" His voice cracked, desperate. "From us, answer me." The star-filled eyes shifted toward him. Elias stiffened under the gaze. To return what was taken, to finish what was broken, to remember what you chose to forget. Elias shook his head, stumbling back. No, you don't understand. We buried it for a reason. Humanity wasn't ready then. We're not ready now. The walls of the chamber responded, images blooming again. Mira and Elias both turned, watching the visions as if caught in a dream. The desert, 1947, the crash site again, but clearer this time. Men shouting, crates carried under floodlights. A row of covered stretchers. One of them shifted. A soldier froze, staring at the movement beneath the canvas. Another soldier pressed a hand over his mouth and barked an order. The stretcher was loaded onto a truck anyway. Elias's younger self appeared at the edge of the scene again, watching. Mira's chest tightened. This time, she saw his face clearly, the horror, the guilt, the silent complicity. The vision shifted to black. Then, another scene. Elias in his 30s, sitting alone in his ranch house. A radio playing faintly. He held a fragment of that unearthly metal in his hand, turning it over and over, whispering something Mira couldn't hear. His eyes wet, his lips moving as if in prayer. Mira turned to him, her voice quiet. "You've carried this your whole life." Elias's hands trembled. "And I kept it buried so the world wouldn't break. And now you've dragged it back into the light." His gaze flicked to the awakened beings. "Tell me, girl, do you even know what you've unleashed?" Before Mira could answer, the chamber shuddered again. A section of the wall peeled open, like the iris of an eye, revealing the night beyond. The desert lay stretched, vast and trembling. Soldiers ringed the ship, floodlights cutting across sand. Yet the beams flickered, weak, as though drained. Vehicles sat dead. Radios screeched useless static. Men raised rifles, but their hands shook, weapons trembling in the pale glow pouring out of the craft. And then, silence. Not absence of sound, but an enforced stillness, as though the air itself had pressed a finger to its lips. Every soldier froze, caught mid-step, mid-breath, mid-thought. The floodlights dimmed to faint ghosts. The desert held its breath. The awakened beings began to move, drifting through the open iris. Dozens of them, their lights spilling across the sand like a new constellation come to Earth. They rose above the ground, silent, serene, eyes blazing with a patience that had waited 7 decades too long. Mira stepped forward, unable to stop herself. She felt the pull of their presence, a gravity deeper than fear. Elias grabbed her wrist again, his voice ragged. "Don't, if you step out there, you're one of them, not one of us." She looked at him, her eyes wet, but steady. "Maybe I've always been both." Elias's grip faltered. His withered face crumpled. "Please, if you do this, the world will never go back." The tallest being hovered at the threshold, waiting for her. Its gaze invited, not demanded. Its voice pressed into her thoughts one last time. "The time of silence is over. Will you speak with us?" Mira drew a shaking breath. Behind her, the chamber still glowed with sleeping cocoons, some stirring, some not yet ready. Before her, the desert lay bathed in alien light, soldiers frozen in fear. History about to shift on its axis. Her father's lullaby whispered in her memory. Not unfinished anymore. Hold. She took one step forward. Elias gasped, reaching for her. But too late. The moment Mira crossed the threshold, the ship responded. The glow intensified, spilling outward across the desert. The ground trembled, not with violence, but with awakening. Every star above seemed to lean closer, burning brighter. The soldiers' weapons fell from their hands, clattering harmlessly onto the sand. Floodlights shattered. Engines died for good. And then, in the silence that followed, one soldier dropped to his knees, staring up at the beings with wide, reverent eyes. Others followed. Mira stood among the light, her heart pounding, as the beings lifted their heads in unison. Their voices filled the night, not sound, but resonance, a song vast and aching, like the universe itself remembering a forgotten verse, the lullaby her father had never finished, the one he must have carried from them, the one now sung in full. The desert was no longer the desert, where once the sand stretched endless and still. Now it shimmered with light, a pale, flowing radiance spilling from the awakened beings. Their song filled the night, not sung with mouths, but carried through every stone, every grain of earth, every trembling atom in the air. Mira stood among them, her body vibrating with the resonance. The sound was not only heard but felt, a lullaby that rocked the very soul, soothing and terrifying all at once. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she was weightless, floating between worlds, between the heartbeat of earth and the pulse of stars far beyond. Her father's voice joined the song in her memory, the unfinished lullaby, once fractured, now complete. He had not forgotten. He had only been waiting, like them, for the day when the missing notes would return. When Mira opened her eyes, she saw the soldiers. Men who moments ago clutched weapons and shouted orders now stood slack-jawed, their faces soft with awe. One by one, knees buckled, not from force, but from reverence. It was as if the song had reached into their deepest selves and reminded them of something they had never known they had lost. Elias stood apart. His withered hands shook, his chest rising and falling like a storm within. His eyes darted from Mira to the beings, then back to the frozen men on the sand. Fear and guilt carved deep into his face. He whispered, almost to himself, all these years, I thought silence was safety. But maybe it was just a wound. The tallest of the beings lowered itself before Mira, its star-filled eyes locking on hers. The desert brightened as if the heavens bent closer, listening. Your kind will ask what we are. The voice pressed gently into her thoughts. But the truer question has always been, what are you without the silence between us? Mira's throat tightened. She wanted to answer, but the words tangled. She was not a scholar, not a leader, not even sure who she was beyond her father's unfinished questions. Yet she felt, for the first time in her life, that she was exactly where she was meant to stand. The being reached out. Its hand, long, translucent, trembling with light, touched her chest over her heart. In an instant, visions poured through her, Earth seen from orbit, fragile and glowing. The Roswell crash. Not an accident, but a sacrifice to deliver a fragment of themselves into human hands. Decades of waiting, of whispers and dreams, of songs carried incomplete across generations, and then a glimpse of what could be, humans, and these star beings standing side by side, weaving knowledge like threads of light, healing wounds not of war, but of loneliness. Her breath hitched. You're not here to conquer us. We are here to end the forgetting. Behind her, Elias dropped to his knees. His eyes brimmed, tears spilling down his lined face. God forgive me. All this time, I should have listened. I should have sung. The smaller being, the one Mira had found in Elias's shed, the one who had first awakened, drifted forward. It pressed its luminous hand against Elias's brow. His body shook, but not with fear. His sobs broke free, carried away on the lullaby that now wove him into its embrace. The tallest being's voice swelled again, not in words, but in meaning. This is not an ending. It is the remembering. The silence is over. The desert sky seemed to shimmer. Constellations brighter than Mira had ever seen. Stars pulsed in rhythm with the song. And for one fleeting moment, she thought she saw them move, whole galaxies shifting like dancers. Bowing toward the earth, the soldiers remained frozen in reverence. The ship behind her throbbed with light as more cocoons stirred, though not all yet ready to wake. The desert floor glowed faintly, as though alive with buried veins of starlight. Mira stood taller, her fear dissolving. She felt her father's presence not as a ghost, but as a thread woven into the melody. At peace at last. She turned to Elias, her voice steady. It's time to tell the story. Not the version they buried, the real one. Elias looked at her, eyes wide and wet. Slowly, he nodded. Yes. No more silence. Above them, the song swelled into something vast and aching, filling every corner of the night. And for the first time since 1947, the desert did not hide a secret. It sang it. The lullaby of the stars carried on, drifting over Roswell, over the sleeping world. A bedtime story whispered not only to Mira, not only to Elias, but to all of humankind. A story that asked, were alien bodies truly found at Roswell? Or were they never lost at all, only waiting for us to remember them? The desert answered with silence, but this time, silence was not forgetting. It was listening. Asterisk, thanks for exploring the cosmos with Cosmic Dream. If this journey sparked your imagination, give it a like. Drop a comment with your favorite sci-fi idea and share with fellow dreamers. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. The next adventure launches soon. Until then, keep dreaming among the stars.